I watched the 20-year anniversary video and gone and done all the dev comm, and here's what I learned from all of that. Primarily, it puts to rest many of the rumours and legends surrounding the Half-Life series over the years. Everything from the lawsuits surrounding Half-Life 2, to the existence of Episode 3, to the design and project choices that Valve decided to embark upon and why, and how 9/11 forced them to remove a section of the game. Yes, Episode 3 was to have lots of awesome things, but no, they didn't think it was awesome enough, so gave us Left 4 Dead instead, which, looking back at, I'm happy with. So I really recommend you watch the 20-year anniversary video and watch it from the beginning, because that will give you the sense of the desperation about the hacks and lawsuits that they faced throughout. It's actually terrifying to hear how close Vivendi got to bankrupting Valve, how they went after the developers and their wives, tried to bankrupt everybody involved, and then sent thousands of documents in Korean to make it next to impossible for Valve to deal with. It's just incredible how a game publisher could care so little about the games themselves and so much about ruining the lives of everybody who was just trying to make the best game ever. Even I got angry just listening to what Valve went through, and I'm more glad than ever that Steam finally came out and is the publishing success that it is. The building pressure section of the anniversary video covers Steam, Half-Life 2 Deathmatch, and how the concept went from updating games to downloading entire games over the internet, and how nobody thought it could be done back then. Fascinating section. But I want to focus this video around Half-Life 2, and I'm going to start this video by talking about the end, because they left the start of the game to the end of development, stating that by then they knew best what the game was going to be like, so we're in the best position to create a great start to establish the themes of the game, and also because by then they were the best with the tools that they had, so they could really create an intro that players would be blown away by. So at that point, it was almost like they had all the grand climactic sections of the game planned, but then had to find a way of making all the basics at the beginning enjoyable before the player encountered the striders and the gravity gun and the bug bait sections and everything that makes Half-Life 2 so iconic. And they did this namely by adding lots of exploding barrels all over the place. They talked about how the Combine Bull started life as a super heavy watermelon, and it never occurred to me that it took until the final level for them to create this energy ball mechanic, only to then retroactively make it your alt fire for your AR2 assault weapon, and to have it feature throughout the rest of the game as well. When designing chapters, they'd start with the toughest fight of that section and then would work backwards from there to make the tutorials to get the player prepared for that end section. They mentioned this for the turret defense arenas, but also with this washing machine puzzle, which they prepared the player for by adding this seesaw training area earlier on to accustom the players to that sort of challenge. It was cool to hear their design process, like how they'd have a spinny trap that the player could crouch beneath, and then they were like, well, wouldn't it be cool if it cut zombies in half, but then the top half of the zombie could then crawl towards the player still. And then from that they'd be like, well, wouldn't it be cool if you could cut the zombies in half yourself by firing blades at them? Or just simple stuff like how if the player can use physics to launch objects at an enemy, then why shouldn't enemies be able to launch the same things back at them? It all came together so beautifully and so logically when you hear the thought processes behind them. They had a big grid with all of the game mechanics on, and how they all interacted with the other game mechanics, like how a grenade would interact with a barnacle monster, for instance. But while some bits of the game came together quickly, other bits were seemingly doomed, like the Borealis. Anybody who worked on this bit of the game would just give up, and I think what really kills the whole Borealis hype is when they say it's simply no fun to play through such an enclosed, claustrophobic environment. Though it would be great for VR, wouldn't it? I was also fascinated by how much emphasis they put on fake stuff. The way ragdoll magnets would pull killed enemies in a certain direction, be it over the edge of drops or violently downwards to make their deaths more satisfying. Bullseyes made enemies fire towards certain windows for dramatic effect, and look targets were used to trigger stuff like snipers shooting stuff where players were looking, and how the striders would wait until the player was looking in their general direction before blowing up something in a climactic way, because what a shame it would be for the player to miss those spectacles. Fake tracer fire was used to make the battles seem larger than they actually are, and if there are 4 enemies attacking you, then only 2 of them are ever allowed to fire at you at once. So many little things were done to enhance the experience and to extract the absolute most out of a game that, at the time, really had to battle against many technological constraints. When Half-Life 2 came out, I remember I played it every day after school for about a month. I was obsessed, yet in all those playthroughs I didn't notice many small touches in the game. For instance, after this section of the game when you're evading mortar fire, I never noticed that the mortar is just sat here on the roof. I guess I just assumed that part of the game followed video game logic, and I certainly never expected to be able to control the mortar itself, which the developers' commentary makes a big deal of, with them all feeling bad that they weren't able to get it playable in some way. I never knew how much they used birds to guide the player's eye towards important details. I guess I don't see birds in real life and imagine that they're trying to show me something important, so why would I do that in a game? But apparently a bird flying towards something in Half-Life 2 was just enough to get players to subconsciously look or to think about that thing in some way. And while I did notice the white paint and occasional bird poo splattered about the place, I never noticed that birds intentionally spawned on your buggy when you were away from it and then pooed all over it, and how you could clean that off by driving it into the water. I also didn't notice how, at the end of the buggy section, a Combine dropship steals it away just here. Though I definitely appreciated the subtle slowing down as you approach the edge of drops, especially during this bridge section of the game, which everybody loves. It's one of the highlights. And this subtle deceleration was used to reduce the amount of times that players would fall off the girders. Given how quickly and haphazardly I blitz through that section of the game these days, it's clearly doing its job very well. Valve are clearly very proud of their vehicles, like how the buggy's sound makes it a lot more exciting and fast feeling than it really is, and how they battled against motion sickness on the airboat sections, and the pains they took to strike a balance between vehicle and foot segments to try and keep everybody happy. Now, the general consensus I've felt from listening to people about Half-Life 2 is that the vehicle parts of the game are too long, but every time I play through the game it feels shorter, so If I'm honest, I never fully understood the Half-Life 2 story, because it's always shown rather than said. So I imagined that the Combine were in some way connected with the Zen storyline from Half-Life 1, because why wouldn't I? But apparently the first game just opened up a beacon, indicating to other planets that Earth has air and water, and then the Combine, being a resource-starved civilization somewhere else in the galaxy, came to exploit its resources. And again, this is shown rather than explained, like how they've been extracting the oceans, which is why the seaside sections of the game look so barren. But again, I'm not sure if you're meant to notice this while playing the game, or if it's just something you're meant to discover in a YouTube video talking about it 20 years after you play it. So the plan for Half-Life 2 was to originally have 3 different alien races, one of them being sort of like the Antlions and stuff that we eventually got. And I'm sad that they dropped all these plans, because I always felt that one of the ways in which Half-Life 2 regressed from the original was in its variety of creatures and weapons. Give me more of those creative things. But the first chapter of the 20-year anniversary video really explains why they couldn't have done that. It talks about all the plans they had for the game and how it inflated and inflated, then how they had to reel it all back in again. It sounds like at the start of development they went wild with ideas for places to visit and creatures to fight, 4 different cities and all that, and then they had to be reminded that this was a Half-Life game, and gradually ideas were dropped and the game condensed into a far more focused experience that Half-Life 2 eventually became. I always imagined this game as being a limitless project. It's the sequel to one of the best games of all time. They must have had a lot of money to develop whatever they wanted for it, but it doesn't sound like it worked like that. And a lot of the anniversary and developer commentary notes talk about the compromises they had to make and the bits they rushed to complete and still aren't happy with, like the balancing of the turret fights. They talk about reusing sections to save on production costs and how snipers and the flare segments are nice ways of cheaply adding more content to the game. They didn't even know what they had was good until they showed it at E3 2003 and everybody loved it. Seriously, check out the anniversary video on Valve's YouTube channel for their 2000, 2002 and 2003 videos about Half-Life 2. It's amazing to see how far it came in just those few short years. And while what it used to be is still mysterious and exciting to think about, I'm very pleased it became the game we eventually got. A lot of the developers' commentary chapters are to be taken literally. I assumed performance would be about frame rate optimization, but it's more about the characters and their performances. How a developer spent 9 months perfecting eyes and how important it was for them to get all of these subtle details right. All stuff I've heard before, but it's lovely to get all this information condensed down into one place, straight from the horse's mouth, so give it a watch. Also, it's lovely to see the accountant's face that Kleiner was based upon, which the developers spotted in a lift one day and were like, wow, your face is perfect for a role in a video game that we're working on. And you get to see some of the other characters as well there. It's near the end of the root canal section where the developer commentary discusses shaders, the minimum spec, and how they created the Valve hardware survey to figure out what everybody was using, because before then it was very hard to target a baseline level of performance that most consumers could meet. There are also some great nodes during the Black Mesa East chapter discussing the character rendering. Several times they discuss issues that they had with lighting, saying that everybody was doing lighting wrong at the time, and it was only when they did it correctly that they discovered how wrong everyone else was about it. Apparently there had been some issues with the maths in graphics cards that was preventing it from working properly, and it sounds like the issues they face were with the lighting of the characters themselves and in the subsurface scattering to get their skin looking convincing. You can hear the meat of this discussion during the Gamma Correction developers commentary segment in Ravenholm, for some reason, saying that graphics cards were making characters' skin look too waxy and sickly, but that it looked fine when not using a graphics card. After checking through all their calculations very closely, they concluded it was a problem beyond their code, and it took the developers at Valve around 2 years to fix the whole thing by convincing the graphics card makers that they were doing the maths all wrong. And eventually a driver update came out that did it right. And suddenly all the characters in Half-Life 2 look like they should do again. I'll now talk you through everything interesting I discovered from those. Now, all the developers are clearly using their own microphone setups, and some of them are so low in quality they sound terrible, and they've clearly gone through some sort of AI processing. I know this because some of the words have actually changed. This bit,
Combine ball and balls training.
it's meant to be Combine Wall. But listen,
Combine ball
that's definitely a bull right there.
and balls training.
Here's another example where Laura clearly says,
Boxcar Bill,
but it's meant to be Boxcar Joe.
Boxcar Bill, Boxcar Bill.
And what about this bit of commentary? Which chapter of the game is this from? Now you'd think, from this chapter's thumbnail, it's this one, but it's also still kind of the previous one, so I'm not quite sure. And Valve, never one to be able to count that well, have 2 Chapter 9s in Half-Life 2. For some reason I don't understand it, it throws everything into disarray. And also, the developer's commentary currently turns itself off after the sniper section of the game, which made me worry I'd missed a load, but apparently they had no commentary for the bank bit of the game at all. It's weird, it's such a big bit of the game, one I was never too fond of if I'm honest, and they had nothing to say about it until you reach the roof of the building. It's sad that Mike, the voice of Barney and G-Man, doesn't have any notes of his own to talk about this stuff, but he does talk about the characters he voices in the anniversary video, so that's cool to check out. He even reveals why the G-Man speaks like he's in several dimensions at once. Spoiler, it's because he's in several dimensions at once.
Speak.
And whilst Gabe Newell starts the whole developer's commentary off with a node at the very beginning of the game, the end of the game is oddly lacking a satisfying conclusion node. It just ends on one talking about the shader effect for the Combine portal, and that's it. As someone who's just spent a week going through all of the nodes in order, really feels anticlimactic. Luckily, the end of the anniversary video is far more satisfying, even hinting heavily that the time is right for more Half-Life content in the not too distant future. So yeah, links to all this stuff in the video's description if you want to know more.